Hello and welcome to the 8th episode of Global Pause Rethink the Future, a podcast that charts the course for the emergence of a way of life out of the consumerist one that we find ourselves ensnared in. So in today's episode we are going to be drawing out we're going to be detailing out the exceptions that we touched upon in the last episode, which related to the exceptions that business have to make in order to overcome cynicism, because essentially they are potentializing your time when they're doing that. So once again, we are, for want of a better way of describing us, consumers. Our agency has been reduced into buying and selling, but predominantly we are seen as consumers. We could say that even our roles as producers has been swallowed up into our roles as consumers. And so if our agency has been reduced into buying and selling, then we have to look at the way how we can if we can look at the way how we can surpass this reduction. So ultimately it relates to the way how, because business sets upon people, they obviously look through the prism of that reduction and so only see you as a potential customer. Then in order to see you as a person, they have to make an exception of commerce in order to potentialize you as the person that you are. So obviously if they do that, then you are naturally going to consider that to be a tactic employed from the aspect of trying to generate some kind of loyalty, for a business to monetize your goodwill. So therefore you're going to be looking at it from the aspect of you're going to level off the possibility that's basically presented there. And so, ultimately business has to make the exceptions initially. So, but they're doing so only to potentialize your time. So in this episode, we're really going to be looking at the way how our time is potentialised when business makes the exceptions of our commerce. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So, because what that does, it very much sets up, I'll work back. If you think that what we're trying to achieve here is to create a different way of giving and receiving. So you've got a certain model that predominates on the face of the planet now that is obviously a commercially orientated way of doing things, through a prism of a small prism or a small understanding of self-interest. So we're looking at the way how you can rethink that to engender, to ennoble action beyond obviously the reduction of want satisfaction. And so therefore we're looking at really rethinking the nature of the relation between business, it's between people, but between business and their consumer base to one of creativity, because ultimately you have to do that if you are going to be engendering a different way of doing things. It's a creative act. And it's a creative overture. It's an enterprise, so it requires a lot of different people or participants all contributing in their own way to facilitate a different way of life that over time is contrasted with the predominant model of doing business, and so therefore they compete on their merits. So one of the things that we have to frame when we're talking about this is that we are talking about essentially what would be an ecosystem to begin with, but that's only initially, because it's going to occur within the retail end of our economic activity to begin with, because ultimately it's the end market, and ultimately any secondary goods, it's all about finished goods. So you're always looking at the consumer market here, all right? So, and that's ultimately where, values are contested. So we're setting out a way of an emergence of a different way of life from the market-orientated one. So we literally are looking at the way how we're going to reorientate civilization through making exceptions that puts into play creativity that is otherwise marginalised or passed over without consequence. All right, so in the scenario of what we talked about, how it potentializes your time, there's a few different ways how this can manifest. So one is that you receive the thing that the business has made an exception of in order to potentialize your time. So it thrusts upon you the value of the actual good, the earth, the community, the business itself, and so therefore you can determine whether or not you accept that as just being, it falls like from manna from the heavens. So it's, you think you're lucky stars. You think of it once again as just being an overture. It's a tactic of the business. So you're looking at through cynicism, or then you potentially can look at it. Well, what's actually going on here? There's something going on. I mean, because like I said, it's about the way how the story is engendered. One way of the way how the story is engendered is through the actions of the business. It also can be done through enterprise good, which is the organisation that is seeding the idea and then very much nurturing it and disseminating it, and obviously then it works through you being subjected to the action on the part of the business in order for you to disseminate. So you could disseminate, speak to one of your friends, you're talking about the nature of what's actually going on, and so that in and of itself, that conversation potentializes another person beyond the act in order for them to maybe look at what's going on here and to consider that this whole initiative is something worthy of their own time. So if that occurs, then you're looking at the way how another person has been potentialized to now actualize the potential that the business is enabled through obviously the exception that it's made. So the way how this would work, and it's ill-defined to begin with, because like I said, this is very much we're conceptualizing what would occur. So we can only talk about the potential. So we can look at maybe potential scenarios of the way how this would manifest, but obviously it's not beholden to what I say because there's a lot of moving parts involved. So one of the things that we could look at is that if there's enough people that have been potentialised through businesses, or that through the nature of people coming across the idea and their own research for whatever they're doing, so what they do is that they become part of enterprise good. So I'll just break it down. There's two different ways. One way could be, like I said, is that they come across it their own way. The other way is that it's through the actions of the business. So in the scenario of the business, there is a thread that runs through the business that has defined you as a consumer, so reduce your agency essentially to your consumption. But because this specific business is part of the ecosystem, there's another thread that comes into play, and that relates to you as a person. All right, so any of the data that they have collected on you, and which this is what happens in our way of life, that all the data that is utilised in order to profile you, to profile your patterns or your behaviour, ultimately, which is to essentially give a better understanding to monetize. That's one side of the way how the use of data and technology works and the tracking that occurs. The other side, when you're looking at from enterprise good, is just to understand you as a person. So the scenario could be a checkout. The business belongs to enterprise good. This is the one thing where it's ill-defined because it's a conceptual. We're looking at it. This is conceptually at the moment. Then. For all intents and purposes, you're making a purchase. A lot of businesses will try activate you as an account, or in the scenario after the purchase has been made, rather than just receive the receipt, then you receive something that is obviously diverges from what you would accept when you've just made the purchase to something that is ultimately the first step to potentialise you, that relates to the way how the message gets seeded. So in the scenario that we're talking about here, it relates to you as a person. So let's say you get an email, a text, whatever it is that you get some form of communication. And so from there on, it's about understanding you as a person. So any question that would follow from that has got nothing to do with the way how business looks upon your agency as being a consumer. It's very much looking at you as the agency that relates to you as a creator. Because it's all about, the whole process is about co-creation, which is ultimately looking at the full scope of your agency. But because we're looking at it in the market, it's circumscribed to the context of making an exchange. All right, so irrespective of how small that may look on the, initially, you've got to think that if you're rethinking the exchange, you're rethinking a whole world. This is the whole point about it. Our whole potential for our civilization can be reduced down into what happens in an exchange. And essentially, this is why it becomes the time consideration on this is very important, because there's a lot of things that you can potentialise in order to see a divergent way of life. And we pass over it without thought, and yet nestled within the exchange that we just accept as a given, there's an opportunity cost. And essentially what we're doing here is we're just kind of detailing that out. So in the scenario of asking questions, it's just about profiling you as a person. I'm not profiling you as a consumer. What you do, what's your passions, what can you contribute to ultimately the creative initiatives of the community that is there in potential, or that is potential at the moment. So in the scenario of such like that, or that you go on to enterprise good and then it's the same scenario but just done in a different avenue. Let's say that there's been enough people that have been potentialised through whichever way, and now you're looking at the way how this can be crystallised down into an event. So in the scenario here, it could be like literally an event. It is very much like a counterpart sign or a proof that what the businesses have done initially to potentialise the culture that they are a part of. This is the one thing. The business is never not part of the culture that they are engendering outside the market. This is the one thing, because what it's doing, it's engendering the culture that otherwise businesses like to think only is an asset. It's only consider their culture to be internal. But the way how we're looking at, there's no distinction between you as a consumer or producer. You are a person. So in the scenario of looking at culture from the aspect of business, you can't separate out the culture from business to the outside. If you want to look at creating a dynamic good that engages the full scope of creativity that you pass over when you position your business in a market, so that's whether or not that's in a consumer market or whether or not that's in a labour market, you don't have to make the distinction. What business needs to do is to engender a culture that doesn't make the distinction, and by doing so, it potentializes people. All right, and that business is part of that culture, is inextricably woven into the culture. All right, and then it potentializes the business just like it potentializes a person, because you're potentializing the creativity that's latent when you pass over an exchange. This is the whole point about it if you can't see it. So in the scenario of an event, all right, so let's say the way how this thing could work. So like I said, the exception that businesses make is very much an exception that potentializes you. It's initiation, I should say. So then the next initiation on the part of the people is the event that would occur where, say you have 100 people and there's 10 people that want to give their time. Like I said, they've seen the initiative, they know what it's about, they want to contribute in some meaningful way. So 10 people don't potentialise themselves, but now actualise the potential by giving. So they do, to a degree, they kind of mirror the exception that the businesses made initially to overcome cynicism, and so therefore they mirror it in a way where rather than being compensated for their actions, they are giving it freely, all right, because they want to contribute. It's done through what they truly feel that they want to create. And if you work, once again, if you're working back from the aspect of that we are abundant beings, then we don't need to be compensated for our actions. This is the whole point. We have a scarcity mindset that is persisted, beyond the securing of necessities, because we live in a world where want is engendered, and so that want can be satisfied. And so therefore a scarcity mindset very much persists, because you pass over the point of you accept the world as a given. You don't realise that you actually create the world, and you only realise that you create the world when you actually animate it beyond the holding pattern that you accept for your lives and orientate it in a completely different way. That's the only time that you will actually really truly understand the power that you have as an individual, and you'll only understand that when you act in the same way with other people. A revolution is not made up of one turn, it is made up of hundreds of thousands of millions of little kind of gestures that over time animates a static or a moribund culture, the one in which we find ourselves in. That's it. You're going to remove all the impasse of all the violence, all that fucking stupidity that has been perpetuated on this planet for so long. You're just going to completely bloody remove it. It's just a lack of thinking on the part of the thinkers that like to think that they know better. All right. So this way you're doing it in a way where you are animating, you're engaging the agency that you pass over. All right. So in the scenario of the event where these people have actualised their agency by giving their time, what they do is that they they create essentially a second initiation, and because they've made they've given their time freely in order to create the event, to help the event, the running of the event. So like I said, you're looking at the way how people have been profiled as far as what they can do, what they can give. So the whole nature of the way how price, rations, things, experiences, etc. And one thing that we have to understand is that a lot of the economic activity, there's a qualitative difference between economic activity, because if you consider that a lot of the economic activity that we engage in is really a substitutable activity for richer communal experiences, then the whole nature of consumerism, when the way how you share yourself is through the things that you buy, ultimately comes redundant, because if you have a richer experience with other people, then the whole signalling that consumption is meant to somehow embody, which is just fucking crass and stupid, it just loses its kind of resonance or its gravity. It's only if you are orientated towards a form of transcendence, of surpassing the drudgery of making a living, and that you feel that you need to differentiate yourselves within to other people, that is something that you obviously aspire to. But once again, the nature of sovereignty is to do with the way how you make exceptions, the way how you animate the world. And so it's only a simulation, the kind of sovereignty that people like to think that they are orientated towards when they're looking at wealth as a pursuit, a wealth as an end in itself, because they accept the world as a given. All right, it's individualised, the pursuit of the good life, to such a degree where you just pass over the disease of our world without question, and don't give it any consideration, because you're only considering a lifestyle obsession. So it's what comes into play is the difference between creating the world and orientating yourself towards a lifestyle within a failing model. That's the difference here. So in the scenario of the people that are now have now actualized by giving it themselves time, what happens here is that, so if we look back at like what I touched upon before about the way how you are gathering information, so like I said, the way how technology is used, on the internet specifically, and the way how tracking is used just to monetize, that's one way of using technology, but that's not, there's two different ways that you can use technology. We've just become accustomed or habitualized into the bastardization of, or a crass pursuit of monetization. All right, so the technology is deployed towards that end. Now, this obviously has to do with overcoming the cynicism that has been engendered when technology is always considered to be utilized to that end. What I'm talking about is utilising technology that is used to demonetize. And the way, how do you do that? Demonetization in this scenario just means that if a person has given their time freely, and ultimately we have a record of that person as being a member, then the actions of what they do, it helps to define that person, that it potentializes their time more because of their actions. So what does it mean when I say potentialize their time? If you consider that enterprise good is an ecosystem, all different businesses where we're engendering creativity, a way of creating a new way of giving and receiving, then ultimately those people that give of their time in the scenario potentialize themselves to receive at another date more than what another person would if they didn't give their time. You understand? So you're making a distinction between people by what they do. All right, so the whole issue is what they do. If you give more, then you potentialize your time to a degree where if you go into a business and you're a person that really gives of your time to such a degree that you're just going to potentialize that exception to occur more often than what it would if you were a person that just received that didn't give of your time to the community to create basically what we're talking about. That's essentially how it works, and it will work in another scenario. So let's draw out upon that. What does that mean? So that means that, say, for instance, you are now, So you've gone from the exception that the business made to potentialize the time to now to the event that is very much the counterpart time to the exception that obviously has been engendered through the actions on the participants that have given their time. So this is the culture that is outside business. So where it comes back in is that, say, because the business is not separate to the culture. The business is part of the culture. All right, it might be an entity in and of itself, but over time, what will occur is that the border between the business and the culture becomes a lot more permeable. All right, and the reason why, that if, say, for instance, that person initially wanted to give of their time to the event that is outside the market, there's no reason why they cannot give of their time inside the market, inside a business that is in the ecosystem. There's no reason. Now, once again, we've got to look at the way how you would view what I'm saying from the aspect of cynicism. You would be thinking, well, why the fuck would I want to give my time to a business when they're only out to monetize my existence? That's the frame of reference, but you've got to work back from that lens. This is a completely different way of doing things, all right? So the cynicism that will persist is always going to come up, because every time I'm going to be talking about potentializing something different, you're always going to be having that thing pop up, because essentially you've accepted your agency. You've accepted your agency into buying and selling. You've accepted yourself as a product. That's really what it comes down to. You've accepted yourself as a commodity, all right? There's a lot of marketing you go read fucking marketing. It's about how you are the product, all right? Do you want to be a fucking product? Fuck that. No, you don't. You're a person. So you're not a fucking product. But the thing is that you have to overcome cynicism, because you know that you are set upon as a product, right? Your consciousness, for fuck's sake, as far as, monetizing your attention with the way how these businesses obviously approach consciousness is to monetize, your attention. So you are the product. Your time is the product. If anything, the attention, the whole thing about monetizing people's attention only just highlights the fact that money equals time. The more that they can get you to stick on one of their devices in their platform, they're monetizing your time. Time equals money. This is the one fulcrum. This is the connection that we need to break, all right, to remove crassness from the world, basically. So in the scenario that we're talking about, like I said, because it's a culture, and there's no difference between the business and the actual culture that they are engendering, all right, and that you're engendering as an individual part of this culture as well. This is the one thing that we have to consider here. Then there's no reason why, in the scenario that we're talking about, that people could not also consider that they want to give of their time to a business. So let's just talk about the way how this would work. So in this scenario, the way how I kind of frame it is, okay, so it's the same scenario as what they would do with an event. But let's say there's 3 people. So for whatever reason, because one of the ways how this will work is that if business have seen beyond the limitation of understanding cultures to do with internally within their business and look beyond that to potentialize a culture that they can share with other businesses, then essentially the pool of talent that they draw from is from that culture that they help engender. So, and it differentiates itself within the mass market. This is the one thing that you have to realize how this will work. And it works for the benefit of the business, because there's a lot of things to do when the cost of employing people has to do with the cultural kind of fit within the business. So if it's been pre-qualified through engendering a culture beyond the business in the ecosystem itself, then rather than looking at the whole pool of talent, the whole mass market, they can very much look at the actual the culture that they've engendered within the mass market in the ecosystem that they've helped create. All right, so therefore that in and of itself actually helps to pre-qualify people that they would want to employ. So let's take the scenario of that you've got 3 people that have decided there's a business that needs, maybe it could be only just, doesn't necessarily have to be the whole, like that they need a job. There may be an event that the business needs people for. So they put out a call to Enterprise Good, the network, that they need people to help. So there's 3 people. All right. So all of them in the scenario that we're talking about here are willing to give. Okay. The intention is to give. Okay. But this is where the exception is the inverse to what the business did. does. And this is the way how you reduce the monetization scenario that I'm talking about. So in the scenario here, because there's no difference between these three people giving to the business and them giving to an event that's created outside the market, because this is where you're starting to, the difference between what is the market and the unmarket starts to blur. And the only way how it can blur is through the culture that you engender. This is the whole point about it. All right, because if you frame it that there is a market and then there is an unmarket, well, we're engendering a happening outside the market, but that potentializes your time inside the market. So the scenario of these three people is where it starts to blur. So these three people are willing to give their time to this business as part of the ecosystem. But in the scenario here where you have three people, okay, that are willing to give their time. That's the intention. Rather than the business makes an exception to their intention. So rather than saying, okay, three business, they all want to give their time, but we've got to look at the way how we're removing money. It's just not you can't cut it off. All right, it's got to be engendered over time. Okay, so I'm compressing this down, and it's very hard to do it other than doing it like in front of probably a whiteboard, but you're compressing a lot of these things into an event where this thing would occur gradually. All right, you have to, you can't, it's got to be unwound. All right, this is what I'm saying to you. So in the scenario of these three people that are willing to give, so the intention is to give, the business makes an exception, but this time is the exception is their giving. So rather than them just accepting their gift of their time in the scenario, in the circumstance in which they had decided to give, they pay two people rather than just accept all three. Okay, they pay two people. So what happens here is that the intent has been to give, and as far as the people are concerned in this scenario, and there's a lot of, like I said, moving parts of this, but we're looking at the way how this thing works conceptually, is that 2 out of 3 people get money, and the one person gets potentialized, as in that they receive nothing. So the funny thing about it is that in the scenario here, the 2 people would think that, yeah, they're better off, yes? You would think because they've been paid that their intention is to give. The one person, and it doesn't necessarily, maybe, all 3 can give. It just depends. I'm just working out the way how you can reduce money. There's a reduction of costs on the part of the business, but then there's also the intent on the part of the people here. But the one person that didn't get paid, well, what's happened is that they've potentialized their time even more. So if we talked about the nature of how that they gave of their time in the event outside the market, in the scenario here, through them not receiving money, all right, so the other 2 have received something for all intents and purposes. What they have received is the potential to reduce, to receive exceptions at a later date. So they potentialise their timeline even more. It's the one thing about potentialising people's time. All right, so the 3 of them have had the intent is to give. The business has made an exception of 2 to actually pay them where they actually would have give. The one person gives the way how that they intended, and through their giving they potentialise them to receive more exceptions in the whole ecosystem at a later date. Right, now you do that's the way how it kind of weaves back and forth, because in the scenario here, obviously the business reduces its cost. Okay, so it reduces its cost in the sense of the labour that it is obviously buying. It's buying your labour in that scenario. But it's reduced the cost associated with whatever they've done. Now, you do that enough, you are slowly removing and potentializing people, and you're habitualizing people to give. This is the whole point about it. We're talking about the way how you're habitualizing, just accepting just a way of habitualizing giving, or a way of acting from the abundance that you are, from animating, creating, and not feeling that you need to be compensated. Because this is the one thing that you pass over when you're looking at an exchange, where a person won't give because they need to secure their temporality. So the insecurity that occurs in the scenario of like barter is the best way to look at it, is always, well, hang on, you've got what I've got what you've got, but I can't give you this because, how am I know at a later date that I'm not going to receive when I need to receive? Now we need, all right, that's the necessity. It's not the supplementary or the substitutable activity or the substitutable things that is a substitute for experience. So we're reducing a lot of the disincarnating visions that people very much are beholden to, that orientates themselves towards interconsumption and through the acquisitiveness of the signs of transcendence, but they can never get. So I think that kind of, if you can understand what I'm talking about there, then, like I said, it's very, 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 it's just a lot more nuanced. But that's really the way how the thing kind of works. It works in the exceptions and mirroring exceptions, and then potentializing the culture in order for it to feed upon itself, and then you're habitualizing the given. So what is the given now? The given is that, time equals money. So in order for you to habitualize that, to break that givenness, then you need to obviously habitualize the actions that would undermine the whole rationale for that, which is engendering basically community and richer experiences with each other, where the want or the scarcity mindset that persists starts to fade, and the abundance and the goodwill that, this is the one thing, the goodwill that is put on a balance sheet starts to animate in that culture. And you do that, it's completely fucking different to anything else that existed on the face of the planet. And it's just whether or not there's enough of you guys out there that really want to try do this. So look, I'll leave it at that. This is a longer podcast than usual because there's a lot more nuance to this thing than before. So until next time, anyway, take care.